So great to be here, guys. Thanks so much. I'll try. I'm from Texas, but I'm a really fast talker, so I'm feeling really bad for this guy over here right now. So hopefully I'll slow down. And this has been it's been a great. I've had a great time here. I actually got in about 1 o'clock. We had some plane issues, and then quickly went from the airport, spoke to some folks at the city, and then did a little tour of the town. Had a great time. Ate over at Indulge. Had an amazing filet, great steak. You guys have an amazing little town here. I just got back from Copenhagen, and then went home for like a day to see my kids. Came here, and tomorrow I'll be in San Francisco. So it's been a whirlwind kind of tour here for me. But I'm really excited to tell you guys about the project. So to get started, my name again, Jason Roberts. I have a firm called Team Better Block in Dallas, Texas. My project, though, is kind of based on these ideas on how do you rapidly revive cities with our communities. Especially when you don't have a lot of money. What can we do? First of all, though, I like to tell folks that I didn't start off as an urban planner. I actually was an IT consultant. I worked in rooms that looked like this all day long. I had a very exciting life, you can tell. A lot of wires and cables, and worked on servers and fun things like that for enterprise-level businesses. But at nighttime, I did have a bit of an outlet. I played in rock bands. So that was my little, okay, so I was a nerd during the day, and then I was kind of a rock guy at night. And so I tour around the country with my friends, and we'd all pile into a van, and you typically go to the bad parts of towns and play these little seedy clubs. But I fell in love with some of these arts districts and these artsy areas and kind of the walkable districts. So anyways, my background, though, is so 1 foot in arts and 1 foot in kind of technology. My ideas on places were really transformed after a trip to Europe I took about 2000. Raise your hand if anyone here has been to Europe at all. Okay, yeah, this is great. Wow, okay, you are all so worldly. So this was my first time, and for me, when you step into a place like this that's roughly 2,000 years old, and you see it's still functioning and functioning so well, and it's surrounded by beauty. You've got these amazing fountains, these great old buildings. You have old people, you have young people, you have markets that are thriving, and these markets have been around for generations. I went up to Amsterdam, and I saw grandparents riding bicycles with their grandkids. I remember being blown away by this idea of like, wouldn't this be great if I could, in my city, do this with my grandchild someday? And I love the form of these old buildings and just the mix of people. I mean, there's a guy who looks like he's from Jamaica wearing a yellow camouflage. That's really fascinating. But then you have just just this mix of culture and interesting things happening in these areas. And these buildings have been around probably 300, 400 years. But they could continually turn into new things that the locals could own, like a little coffee shop for one generation, and the next generation, maybe a flower shop. So I looked at this and I thought, well, what are we building? What's going to be our legacy? What is going to be the thing that's really that we're imparting on to our future generations and that we're going to be proud of, that are like these things, that have stood the test of time? And I got back to Dallas and I saw a lot of this. And this is probably the most depressing things you see when you get back from a stay in Europe. And you look at this and you think, well, I don't know where I'm going to put my cafe table here. I'm going to have a really hard time riding bikes with my grandchild someday. And we spent billions. We've spent billions on this project. This project's called the High Five. It's not terribly far from where I live. And then beyond that, we had done we had done all these plans. We'd spent millions of dollars on consultants and talking about ideas. We had our Forward Dallas plan and our Downtown Dallas 360 plan and our 2035 mobility plan. And I see these plans, and just as a person that doesn't know the planning world, I just think, it sounds to me like we're going to have a great city in 2035. I hope I make it, And beyond that, I was told, that's great. You want this to be Europe. You want to be Paris, but this is Dallas. Come on now. This is a car culture. It gets really hot. That's ridiculous. So I had an entrenched belief system that for some reason, you get in an airplane, you fly somewhere else, and you actually start enjoying sitting outside and drinking coffee and listening to accordion players, and once you get back home, that just goes away. But I didn't buy into that idea. So I decided to start getting involved, but one of the first things I noticed was whenever I would go to community meetings to talk about these ideas on what was happening in our communities, we had a lot of folks that were doing this. When we said, hey, if I said, hey, why don't we try to do something that's cool, like a cool fountain, like, no! And when you got down to it, what people were getting upset about were the fear of change. There was a lot of fear in noticing that we were building our communities based on ideas on fear, afraid of getting, afraid of our security, afraid for, fear of the unknown, all kinds of things. And then beyond that, I saw we did some planning exercises where we draw on papers and talk about what we wanted to have in our community. This is one design charrette we did that was in 2009, and we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and lots of drawings that were abstract and a lot of conversations. But if you look at that same street today, it looks like this. It has not changed. We spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. We did lots of drawings, lots of designs. We've got manuals and books sitting on shelves telling us why this should be great. The realization on this is interesting. This is right next to downtown. The traffic counts were estimated to be 60,000 cars per day. It was built for 60,000 cars per day. It's averaging about 10,000 cars per day. So just the cost of maintaining this, just the asphalt, the striping, all the pipes and the water, all of the stuff that has to go through this when there's nothing to really activate this on the edges is outrageous, right? And so again, this was just an example of like we just weren't moving the ball forward in my community. And then another thing I found out too, I started going to meetings in my community. I found sometimes there were opportunities came up. I went to a local chamber of commerce meeting. It was my first time. I was the new guy. I was a young kid that was just showing up. I wanted to get involved, and they said, we've got $30,000 of federal money that's been reappropriated to do trails in our community. Who wants to lead but we have to write this application. Who wants to lead the charge? I was new. I didn't know anybody, so I was kind of quiet. I didn't want to get involved. Nobody rose their hand. And we had a lot of cheerleaders, but we had no champions. And so at that point, the president of the chamber said, okay, no one's going to take this initiative, so this will just pass. And so I immediately learned that it takes one person standing up saying, I'll fight for these things to get things done. So I took on a project. I had an old building in my community called the Texas Theater. This is actually somewhat infamous. It's boarded up, but this is where Lee Harvey Oswald was captured. But it's been boarded up for years. The sign that you see now was actually put up by Oliver Stone for the movie JFK. This theater had a board of directors that had been working to try to bring it back to life, but it was going to cost millions of dollars. They said it's going to take years, capital campaigns, and I'm a young guy, I'm naive, I know nothing about this stuff, and I'm like, why don't we just use it right now? It's an old theater, let's do stuff inside of it. I took a trip to New York, and I noticed a cool project idea. An idea I saw. An artist there was going to have an art showing the next day at this art gallery, but he didn't have any of his art ready. He filled up the gallery with 100 canvases and painted them all the day before, and then he put a donation box out and he says, go out and just put in what you think it's worth. And just take a piece. He really his mission in life was just to get his art in as many homes around the world as possible. So I love this idea of one person doing 100 things to try to activate a space. So I thought, well, it's probably going to be hard for me to find that guy. But maybe I'm in the arts world a little bit with my music and stuff. Maybe I can get 100 people in my community to do one piece each, right? So we don't have money, but I got 100 people, right? And they're artists, so of course they don't have money, right? So I decided to do the same idea. This is my band, and we're building these easels, and we're in this old theater. Boarded up for years, right? 10 years. And we are also, this happens to be the bad part of town. This is Oak Cliff in Dallas, which is synonymous to gang warfare for anybody who hears the term in the city. And this is winter as well. So minutes before about to open the doors, I thought, this is going to be an absolute failure. What was I thinking? It's the bad part of town. It's winter. It's an abandoned theater that nobody thinks about going to. What were we thinking? But we opened the doors, and we had about 700 people show up. And they all came out, and they said, we've been waiting for somebody to do something. We were waiting for a champion to come in and start making things happen in this area. This is so exciting. How can we help? We want to take part. We sold all the art, and we gave it to a local charity. But beyond that, I just realized real fast that it just takes somebody standing up and just kind of mobilizing the community a bit. And then what's happened since then, again, the board of directors that was there was trying to do these massive capital campaigns, raise millions of dollars. Nothing was happening. We found about 4 or 5 guys in the community that were passionate about film and went in and just started activating it and showing art house films. And now it's a thriving theater space. It's the anchor for the area. It's roaring back to life, doing wonderfully. And that wouldn't have happened had I not just got a bunch of people together and showed what it could be. Okay, so drunk with enthusiasm and excitement, thinking like, man, if I can fix theaters, what else can I do, right? I see in my community, I had a bunch of old broken down buildings that were vacant. And when I went to the library to kind of look up the maps of our area, these buildings, I noticed that all of those buildings happen to fall along these black lines here, typically at the intersections. Well, this black line happened to be a streetcar. Most all cities that had 30,000 people or more in the 1900s had a streetcar. So we had a streetcar in this neighborhood, and actually our community was built as a streetcar suburb. It really, these buildings were made that were in these areas were made for a streetcar. In fact, people would start their day in the morning, they'd wake up, they'd get a cup of coffee at the local deli or coffee shop, they'd hop on the streetcar, go to work. At the end of the day, come back home, they go to the beautician or the deli or the baker or the butcher. So these were very much entrenched into our communities. So we ripped them out. And the buildings just failed, right? We turned them all into we changed the zoning and all kinds of interesting things. So I talked to some folks about, like, what can we do to revive our community? We're brainstorming ideas, and I said, I know, let's bring the streetcar back. They're like, that's a crazy idea. It'll never work. It's been dead for 50 years. It's preposterous. Don't even, use your energy and time for other things. So I heard that, and I thought, okay, well, you know what? I know nothing about streetcars, but I do know things about computers. I build websites and things like that. So I went home that night. I created a website called the Oak Cliff Transit Authority. I said, the Oak Cliff Transit Authority, we're going to bring back the historic streetcar. I showed pictures of European streetcars, again, because, like that guy wants everything from Europe, whatever. I had about pages and board and news and history. It looked really official, right? And then the newspaper came out the next week, and they said, dreaming of the day that the streetcars return. That's what Jason Roberts and other members of the recently formed Oak Cliff Transit Authority are hoping. There were no other members. But the interesting thing was people read that article, and they said, wow, we're getting a streetcar? We have a group trying to fight for a streetcar? I had an 80-year-old a guy named Harry who was one of my heroes to this day. But he looked like Santa Claus, and he used to work on streetcars in the 1950s. He said, I want to help. I can lend my expertise. And I had a civil engineering guy, and he came up and he said, look, I will donate pro bono my time to doing a feasibility study. Because a feasibility study is what was the first step needed, which would be about $50,000. I just got that donated to me. And we created an official nonprofit and a real board to promote this idea of a streetcar based on that website. Okay, so while I'm doing this streetcar work here, I'm studying cities, I'm learning about streetcars. I'm not a streetcar guy, but I'm trying to figure this stuff out, right? Rapidly. I'm going to cities that have been reintroducing these things, like Little Rock and Portland. And then I noticed that a lot of these cities also have a lot of bike infrastructure, right? I'm saying, okay, and I'd been to Europe, but when I see bicycling in Dallas, I see it's really sweaty and spandex and lycra and just like 100-mile distances, but when I looked in Europe, I saw like these heavy bikes and pretty girls in dresses and guys in suits, and I thought, of the two, I really like this option, and we're not really promoting this one over here. So I got together with some friends that rode bicycles, and I said, why don't we kind of take the same ideas that I did with the Streetcar Project, and we'll do it with the bike group, right? So we create Bike-Friendly Oak Cliff. We did a little logo, and I announced to the community, we're just going to do this in Oak Cliff because Dallas, obviously, we don't know we can't gauge the temperature on people's ideas on this for the whole city. So we announced that we're going to do a big public ride with the community. We thought maybe if we're lucky, 10, 20 people tops would show up to ride their old heavy Schwinn's that were sitting in their garages, rusting out for years, and just promoting this idea of riding to the grocery store or what have you. And now we didn't have a lot of things to, our community, again, was the bad part of town. We had nothing to really promote. So I just said, why don't we just follow the trail of Lee Harvey Oswald? That's what we got, right? So I make the announcement. We set the date. Show up, and 150 people show up. So now it wasn't 20 people, it was 150 people, and at that point I realized, wow, I got a little army here. And it was really scary because, first of all, I didn't own a bicycle when I started Bike Friendly Oak Cliff. I loved the idea of having a bike culture, right? And then what you don't see in this picture is me at the front of this line looking terrified, right? Because I'm like, this is not my bicycle. I've borrowed this, and these people are following me. They think I know what I'm doing. I'm not a leader in any capacity. And this is what I tell people all the time now, that I've learned that if you're passionate about something, you have all it takes to become a leader. So run with that and just realize that, because again, we're looking for these leaders, not cheerleaders, but leaders or champions. So I was able to champion a bicycle movement, and I know that I championed a streetcar movement and a bicycle movement at the same time. Okay, and then another cool thing, something I noticed, I've got two little kids, and at the school, nobody rode bicycles at my local school. At their school, there was no bike racks or anything. And I thought, when I was a kid, we all rode bikes. So I thought, okay, well, how can I get the kids to ride real fast? And again, kind of taking these simple ideas, just simple rewards, instead of talking about the fears, because oftentimes it was the fears that were talked about, kids getting snatched or hit by cars, which we never worried about when we were kids. And statistically, numbers hadn't changed or anything on things like that, on kids getting hurt. But for some reason, the culture changed, right? So I just made some punch cards, right? Simple stuff that I knew how to do out at my house. We print those out with some friends, made some T-shirts, said, look, kids, if you ride your bicycle to school, punch a punch card every day that you ride. We're promoting health, right? This is great, good for our community. At the end of the week, we'll all go out and get root beer floats together. That probably doesn't help with the health argument. But at the end of it, we had 100 kids bicycling from the community. And then what's happened ever since then is we've created a bike culture in the community. This has been amazing. Kids now that weren't riding bicycles before now demand bicycles at Christmas at age 3 and 4 because they want to be a part of the rides that happen now with the school that we activated. Okay, so now I've done this theater, right? I'm working on streetcars and bicycles all the same time. I'm working computers and rock bands at the same time too, so trying to do way too much. I've got massive ADD, by the way. This is one of the blocks in my community, right? This is one of the streetcar stops I told you about. They're all vacant. I had some friends that came in here and said they wanted to open a bike shop, Oak Cliff Bicycle Company. We were able to promote bicycling, so we helped get business in the ground as well with the community based on this culture we created. Now, it was zoned as a light industrial business building. This area was light industrial, which basically just meant 10% of the showroom floor could be for retail. The rest of the building had to be for services. And so really, these guys didn't do that. They ended up making the whole, 80% of the store retail, right? But it made me realize, what else is going on here that's wrong? What other rules have we put in place to make it, to disincentivize things to make these come back to life? Well, one of the things I can tell you off the bat was we turned this street into a couplet, a one-way street. So to make it more high-speed, to get people in and out of the area faster. Well, that hurts these old buildings because they lost 50% of their visibility right off the bat, right? And then we took away we thinned the sidewalks out, which these used to have very active sidewalks. We took out the landscaping in the area. And then beyond that, we started creating a series of rules and ordinances that made things cost prohibitive that I found, if you wanted to have flowers on the sidewalk, that was going to be $1,000, right? If I wanted to do shade awnings for every single window, and it's hot in Dallas, so shade awnings are great, right? $1,000 per awning. So if I wanted to do outdoor cafe seating, that's going to be $1,000 times market value times 85% times 12% per year. And if I wanted to put merchandise on the sidewalk, that is illegal. So there goes your fruit stands and your book stalls, all that cool stuff, right? And really the killer for, if you want to really kill a street life, you should create an ordinance that says crowds are not allowed to gather on the sidewalk. So all that stuff I saw happening in these places I loved was either extremely cost prohibitive, especially if I'm a local business owner. If I want to open a coffee shop, and I'm just struggling to hobble money together in some loans, and it's costing me $5,000-$6,000 just to make it inviting to come to the place. Before I'm even talking about cost of goods and and all that other good stuff, my labor. All right, so obviously I looked at this block and said, guys, we're obviously not allowed to do anything legally cool in this area. So what would happen if we took a weekend and we just broke every law we possibly could, right? So we took that street and just taking those ideas I saw from other places and said, let's paint our own European-style bike lanes, and let's put outdoor cafe seating in. We'll get historic streetlights, and we'll reline the streets and make it thinner as well so people can have an inviting presence. This is in a neighborhood. We could literally walk here. There's houses right behind these buildings. So this could be our new neighborhood gathering places like they used to be when my grandparents were here, right? And then we'll take all those vacant buildings and we'll put the businesses we wish we had. We created coffee shops and flower shops. We created, we turned car garages into kids' art galleries, right? Because we had kids that didn't have anything to do after school. We created bookstores, all kinds of fun stuff, right? And then we took every one of those rules I told you about, I showed you, and we printed them off and we put them in the windows. So people could see that all this stuff you're seeing is actually not allowed. We're just doing this for a couple days so you can see. And then we invited the city staff and mayor out and all and said, like, surprise, come to our block party. And, and they were like, this is great. Like, oh, we're not supposed to be here. But they turned around and they said, well, you know what? Why did we create all these rules? This is crazy. This is much more preferable, right? This is, obviously for the economics of the area, for getting more people out, for making it more social, making it, it just makes absolute sense. And so when we start looking at those rules, we found out they'd been on the books since 1941, 70 years. And so I started asking, well, why did we do these things? Nobody had a really good answer. We just kept doing things based on these rules that we'd set in place, right, for a long time. And then I said, well, even if, there was a good rationale, maybe it was some liability concern or something, where did we come up with the figure of $1,000? And then when you start drilling down into that, you realize it's just an arbitrary number that gets thrown out. Well, unfortunately, that arbitrary number translates to having disincentivizing the stuff that makes places amazing, right? Okay. So what happened was really cool, too, after this, too. I don't know if anybody here started a business. I've started several, and I can tell you the hurdles to starting a business are very high. It's very, especially, you're working a full-time job, you're trying to figure out, you got your pro formas, your insurances, you got to get all your permits lined up, you're meeting with banks, you're giving them your business plans, you're having these discussions, and you're asking for six-digit figures for these loans. So that's very daunting for local businesses. Well, we created this little business through our Better Block project where the community helped just fix the space up. And it was called Oil and Cotton. And the thing is, the community loved it so much, and it was a place for the kids. They said, we want this to stay. Moms started volunteering their time for them. The girls that helped start this just as a temporary thing, they put it together for $5,000. And then slowly, the moms in the area started co-opting the space until they were up on their feet and could be profitable. And now they are very viable. They're an anchor to the area. They're up and running. They're doing great. So they were able to basically do what they love and not worry about all of the hurdles and all of the obstacles we put in place and the rules and regulations and focus on this thing. And then we get a great thing from our community based on this. So, we had to wipe away, again, a lot of our preconceived notions, and we had to kind of break the rules a bit, right? Now, the interesting thing, if you look at these buildings, this is before the project, right? Property owner owned this for years, and you had some intermittent leasing. They put art in the windows or things from time to time. But after the project, within weeks, every single space leased, right? Everybody wanted the space. They saw the vision. They wanted to take part. And then besides that, we actually we got money for the area to actually change the physical form permanently because we were able to show how it could be different. All right, we did that project in spring. So everyone said, yeah, that's great, it's fine. People would be outside in spring, but in Dallas it gets hot 3-4 months out of the year. It's 250 degrees most of the time, right? So I thought, okay, well, let's take a street and we'll do this first weekend of September, like September 3rd. It's 104 degrees outside. I'll take another one of these other streetcar stops I had. Same old historic buildings, zoned poorly, all kinds of issues. The streets had been widened. Sidewalks were taken away on one side. We had broken up sidewalks on the other side. I've got businesses that are continually failing. I've got a pole with nothing on it. I've got, it's just probably an example, textbook example of what beauty is not, right? Okay, so we took that street and just over a few hours with some friends, a case of beer, some pizza, and we brought out 42 trees. We brought out 100 bushes and changed and created pedestrian islands so it would be safer for people to cross the area. We went in and we took old pallets and we created decks so some of these businesses could have outdoor cafe seating, right? And then we created pop-up businesses again as well. We painted our own crosswalks. You're technically not supposed to do that. We took the poles, right? And again, we told people we were the bike part of town. So we started putting bikes on everything, right? And the interesting thing is when you keep telling people that you're a certain thing, like you're a bike part of town or you're the pizza part of town or whatever you are, it starts becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy because people start buying bicycles and people start moving the area saying, this is the bike part of town, I want to be here. And then what was amazing too is like under those trees, it's 104 degrees outside, people are still sitting outside. We created an environment that was more irresistible to people. And I thought this was interesting. The Danish have got or Dutch have got an interesting saying. They say there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing. and I like that. And again, I just got back from Copenhagen, and I was there, and I went to a little cafe, and it was cold. It was like 55 degrees, which is cold for me, from a Texan. But they had like little heaters, and they had blankets they'd give you, so you could still sit outside. It was amazing. It's like drinking espresso, sit under a blanket, and see all this kind of amazing pedestrian life in the area. So they learned to work with their environment. But beyond that, I had a lady who was probably close to 80 years old sitting at a table here, and she's not in this picture, but she was crying, and I thought, oh no, she's got heat exhaustion. This project is going to be this is going to be in the paper. We're ruined, right? And I asked her, I was like, ma'am, can I get you some water? What's wrong? What can I do? And she's like, the street looks like it did when I was a little girl. So it made us realize that all we did was just kind of we took away that fear that we created for the place, and we put back into the love in the place. And that's you have two options for a place. You can either go with fear or go with love. And I found that love is kind of more fun. All right. And this is a kind of a fun picture from the project too. Again, we'd seen so many architectural renderings through SketchUp and AutoCAD and cool things like that of how cool places could be. We just took the same energy they do in those drawings and we just built it ourselves, right? Those aren't Photoshop trees, they're real trees. That's not Photoshop crosswalks, those are real crosswalks. That's real art. Those are real people bicycling in my community. Those are real blue clouds, or white clouds, but it's a real blue sky. So anyways, that was what was, that was, we had so much rendering fatigue because we'd seen how great we could be. But whenever people could experience it, gosh, it was so much more powerful. And then what was interesting was the buildings and the businesses in the area that were there before that were, again, fear-based. We had bars on the windows, right? They weren't activating the outside, weeds everywhere. It just looks like a space that feels dangerous, right? Because it's all about perception, right? And I can tell you right now, so much of our problems are driven by perception. But anyways, so what happens after this project? Literally weeks after we leave, they peel all the bars off the windows, they start creating outdoor cafe seating, they start landscaping the spaces, business goes up, people start moving to the area, it's affecting home sales, all kinds of the great stuff you want to have happen, just by us testing out some of these ideas and breaking some rules temporarily. This is another building that had been sitting on the block for 10 years vacant with mirrored glass. I remember we peeled off the mirrored glass because I couldn't stand that. We couldn't do window shopping. And there, you see, it's got weeds overgrown. Weeks after the project, once we left, a local guy comes in, he buys it. Turns into a local beer and wine shop. He actually donates to every project we do now. So we actually have a benefactor for our projects based on us just getting together with the community, taking a weekend. We took a weekend and did this. Okay, so I have another group here too. So we're taking these ideas forward. Like we're talking about this ideas of how do you do things whenever we have rules in place, but we feel like those rules might be so prohibitive that nothing gets done, right? Or makes things take too much time or cost too much money. And those are the two issues for cities, by the way. It's that scale, the problem's too big, and it costs too much money. And if you know that every city has got those two problems, like you can start trying to take away the regulations and the rules and figure out how do we tackle those issues. And you start realizing you use the resources in your neighborhood, you use the people and the organizations that are there to try to fix things at a smaller space, right? Smaller scale. So this one group wants to do a dog park in my neighborhood. I talked to the city council member. City council member goes back to staff. Staff says, we can't do dog parks unless there's 3 acres of land. And it's going to take us, we're going to have to do, $1 million of environmental studies and all kinds of things like that, right? And so they're like, man, this is a beatdown. We want to do something in our neighborhood, but we're going to have to drive our dogs to a park somewhere far away, and it's going to take us years to get this. Like, what would you guys do? And we're standing across from this median in my neighborhood that is, you can see it's weeds, overgrown. It's a dumping ground, right? And it's an overly wide median that was created by the couplet I showed you earlier. And I said, well, why don't we just turn that into a dog park? It's in the neighborhood. You can show people how to walk to it. We don't have, why does it have to be 3 acres? Like, why don't we just make it half an acre? Because that's manageable. We can actually manage that. Financially, we can, as a community, we can create a nonprofit to help fund and administer that. And they said, okay, that's great. And then their default mentality was just like everyone else's, was like, we'll do a lot of meetings, a lot of planning, we'll make this big, right? and maybe in 6 or 7 months, we'll do something. Like is that what you're thinking? I was like, well, I don't know. I was thinking, like, why don't we just do it next weekend, right? And so we did. Because I found, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Occam's razor, that the idea of like the simplest solution is probably the best, and it's amazing how often that works. We mowed the grass. We found out that really a dog park, it's not that complex. It's a fence. If you're ever trying to figure out how to build a dog park, dogs don't need much. They just need a place to pee. And this all sounds like like heady stuff, but we're thinking about all these studies and all. And then beyond that, I realized these are actually places for people to create meaningful social interaction in our community. These are gathering places for our community. These are like what you'd find in Ireland would be the pubs, right? So as opposed to making them focused for people, let's focus them on dogs. Let's focus them on people. So we built our own benches and seating and put swings out for kids. And now we're getting a dog park in the neighborhood, and it's smaller, based on those ideas. Just because we threw out the ideas that we said this is the way it has to be done, and said, why does it have to be done this way? One of the biggest concepts we found was, and this was kind of us being kind of punk rockers, the city of Dallas' motto is think big, right? So we thought, well, we'll be Oak Cliff, we think small, right? But we found, even though we did that kind of jokingly, that was really the power of the project. As opposed to trying to fix a mile corridor, really the beauty was to take just a block. And I found that the places I loved around the world, whether they were in, Guthrie, Oklahoma, or Paris, France, were often only a block in size. They weren't too big, but they had a lot of amazing things in little spaces. They had a little cafe, a little flower shop. They had, a little local tavern. They had, places for kids to play. They had 100 little things, falafel stands, fruit stands, but they're all crammed in, and it was all the community, too. The community built these things. So that was a huge concept, an idea for us, this idea of not think big, think small. And that's manageable, and that's doable. And that's part of our problem is we make things complex for some reason. I think we love making, you saw that group with the dog park. They wanted to make a process complex that they didn't even have to. We had a blank field that, well, we needed a lawnmower and some fencing. That's not difficult. So some of the ideas behind the Better Block have been pretty simple now. What we do, one of the biggest things is work fast. Commit to physical change in days, not years. So typically, again, I saw the 2035 mobility plan. Well, that's great. But how do I fix a place in 20 days? And then another thing was to get out of the town halls and let's go onto the street. Let's look at the problems. Because the town halls are environments that we basically just allow for naysaying to occur and people to come up with the worst case scenarios, right? Because again, we build based on fear. That's how we build. And so I thought, well, why don't we just go ahead and go out to the place where we can all see the problem together and say, what can we do as a community in days to get something happening here? And I guess I know everyone talks about the fear of liability. So, and that's a reality, sure. But there's ways around that. You can get event insurances for temporary installations and all kinds of things. And we've done it many times. And then another thing we found, anything we're going to do permanently, though, should promote this timeless form. Why don't we start referencing the things that we found, like the things I saw in Rome that existed for 2,000 years and kept on doing well? And why don't we start applying some of those ideas in our community? Because, we should probably learn from these things. And then the two biggest concepts that I got from a guy named Jaime Lerner out of Brazil was the problem was we were told that we just didn't have enough money. But he says this, and this is brilliant because we use this all the time. Said if you actually want innovation to occur, take a zero away from your budget. If you want ultimate innovation to occur, ultimate innovation in a more sustainable, more durable, or more sustainable, I should say, take away 2 zeros from your budget. And then how do you do things when you start taking zeros away from your budget? You start managing the equation of co-responsibility. You start bringing as many people and organizations and resources that are in the local area into the mix and have them all help raise the boat together, right? All right, and so some of the ideas we saw were happening like in New York where they transformed Times Square. I don't know if you've been there recently, but half of Times Square is now for cars and the other half is for people. It was all cars. You guys remember the classic pictures of cabs everywhere. And all they did was take paint, chairs, planters. That's all they used for this. And everyone said this was going to be Carmageddon. It's going to be horrible. You can't do this to the crossroads of the world. But it's actually dramatically increased the economics of the area, put more eyes on the street, made it safer. All kinds of amazing things have happened based on this project. Made it safer for pedestrians, for bicycles, and cars. And so another cool thing we found with our project was, I was a computer guy. I knew AutoCAD. I knew SketchUp. I knew how to do those renderings. But the tools I found that were the most powerful for me to use to analyze things happening on the ground, to do real-time analysis, was chalk and cones. Things I could buy chalk at the kids' play store and cones. And so this is what I do is I take these streets that were overly wide that we were paying. I don't know if you guys know, but just to paint stripes on a mile of street, paint the stripes you see, $30,000 per mile. So imagine you make that into a 6-lane road. What does that extrapolate out to? And you have a lot of these areas that have no justification because maybe 30 minutes, 2 times a day, it's full from 8 o'clock to 8:30 and from 5 to 5:30. But the rest of the time, we're paying for this massive infrastructure. This made no sense to me. So, and we were told if we change that infrastructure, if we start thinning it up a bit or giving it over to other modes of transit or what have you, it was going to be Carmageddon, right? And I thought, well, how do we know? And they said, well, the city will have to do all this modeling and traffic analysis and cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so I said, well, why don't we just draw bulb outs and draw how things would look in this area if we change this? And they said, okay, that's great, you did that, but how do you know it's actually going to work? How do you know what's going to happen to the rest of traffic? So it was really tricky. We just grabbed those orange cones and put them on the chalk lines, right? And then we just watched. We said, let's see what happens, right? And let's invite the naysaying. Maybe it will be Carmageddon. I don't know. But I know that predictive analysis and predictive modeling is actually is a horrible science. I know that I can show you anybody traffic models that were for streets throughout even your community that were projections for 10 years, from 10 years ago, for now, that are completely off. But we're paying for infrastructure based on this predictive analysis, right? But I was able to do this here. And then the thing is, if a bus was coming through the neighborhood and it hit one of the cones, we're like, oh, great, we messed up the curb radii, the distance. Like, what are we going to do? We should move the cone. We should move it. Like, all right, now, that would have been a change order, right? Like for a traditional transportation planning. But that was moving a cone a foot. And then we can base your ideas, and we can watch it for a while. Let's watch it for a couple of weeks, and let's gather some metrics, right? Because I found that nothing matters to a city unless it's been counted. And so once I figured that trick out, I'm like, I'm a computer guy. I can get around counting. And so this is some of the stuff we use too. We use like white duct tape to reline the streets. Real simple stuff because it looks just like thermoplastic paint. But again, not rocket science. This is stuff I buy at Home Depot. We use online tools. So now the designing tools that were, you are high-end designing tools. This stuff is done by Code for America now, free online. You can get these tools. This is a nonprofit group that was set up by the O'Reilly group. Anyways, I can do my own. I can drop and drag street configurations. This is just 2 that we put together for City of Norfolk. We've got like 5 options though that we're going to test out there that we drew ourselves with the community. And then we talked to the transportation engineering staff and said, is this viable? And they'd walk us through that. But the community was able to take the design back, right? And then again, around that takeaway is zero concept, why that was so big was, sorry, I'll let you guys change up here. I'm going fast, sorry. It's like my arms. You can shake it out if you want. All right, so we had one project where we thought, well, maybe we'll have $10,000 for public benches, right? But when we had that big number, people in the community started fighting over what the benches were going to be. Would you get traditional? Should you do modern? Should it be this brand? And then as the project started getting closer to the deadline, we realized we only had $1,000. So it took a 0 away, right? And at that point, your options get really limited. So it's like, okay, it's IKEA or Target, right? Like, what do we have there? And then we realized the project's about to come around, and we actually never raised the money. And now I may be able to pass a hat around and get $100. So So how am I going to get public benches out with $100? I need 10, 20 of these. Well, we just start taking away the 2 zeros and we build them ourselves. We find a bunch of old pallets and we put them out there. We started painting them. And the interesting thing was when we did this with the community, it was such a barn building exercise for people to get involved with fixing their own places. It started transferring the ownership. The community realized, this is my block. And the thing is, we found that is if somebody had tagged with graffiti the $10,000 benches, people would have been slightly upset, but really would have been like, well, that's what happens, dang kids, right? But if somebody would have tagged these things, everybody would have freaked out because they were like, I built that. That was my chair. So we realized there was a sense of ownership that occurred that was so amazing and that we needed for these projects. So again, I talked about the counting, why the counting is important. Once I figured that trick out, and that's the biggest trick. It's so simple. It's just count everything you want. Count what you want to have happen, right? So if you, let's say you want to have 10 street musicians, you only have 2 now. So put a metric. I got 2 now, I want 10. How do you make that happen, right, in between? So we started realizing, we want the traffic speeds to slow in these kind of walkable areas, right? It's 34 miles an hour now, so how do we get it to 20 miles an hour? And then we realized, places that we love around the world typically aren't so loud, so how do we measure the audibles, with the decibel meters? And then we found tools online, open source traffic counting tools. So we can put these strips out and count bikes and cars that go over, and we can upload that online. So the tools are now in our hands, much like Wikipedia has decentralized the idea of the encyclopedia, right? So it was one group before, and now it's many, right? And people talk about the errors in Wikipedia, but I don't know if you've ever heard of the studies on the errors that are in Britannica, which is just, it's So anyways, and then, so this is just some of the metrics we gather. We gather so many, but the time people linger, Facebook check-ins, hashtags for places, the crime, sandwich boards, active merchants associations, percent of the ground floor that's dedicated to retail business, building sales, the hours of business operation. This is one page of probably 10 that we created that we just started counting with our community. Okay, so I'm going to give you another example of a couple more projects and start wrapping things up here. But this is a project I had in South Dallas. Again, this is a street, and this is a 90% African-American community, extreme poverty, major alcohol and drug issues in this area. And we were asked to come in and say, what would you do with this? And my business partner looked at this and he thought, I don't want to be here. I'm scared for my life. This is horrible. This is not a place, this is not somewhere anybody should ever have to frequent. Although you would see kids walking every once in a while from schools to the neighborhood apartment. So we're like, this is, we got to figure out a way to fall in love with this place because it is completely broken. It is not doing anything for us as a city on the tax rolls. So we took that street and we also looked at some of the other issues. Again, the weeds overgrown, phone booths with no phones, liquor stores everywhere, right? Okay, this is the standard fare. So we took this street and just over just a few hours turned it into this street, right? Then we had to figure out, though, how can we get the community out to this space? Because they didn't want to be here. So we rode our bicycles around the community, and we tried to figure out, what is this community good at? What is it we can find that we love about this? And we found all these little shotgun churches. They were playing all this great gospel music. And then we saw these guys that were smoking barbecue in the front of our houses. So we thought, we'll throw a gospel barbecue, right? That's all we got. You got to find the assets, right? The community. So, thank you. The guys brought the barbecue out. The bar, that was good. We had gospel choir singing, right? And then I had my own little pieces of Paris that I created for this community. These kids were able to sit in the street, and I found that people love beauty no matter where it's at. So before, it was painful, it was ugly, it was unloved, it's built out of fear, and this is basically a place that was built out of love, and kids are smiling, they're happy, and it's an environment that breeds success. Okay. All right, and so this is just a little project I'd like to show, which is a lot of fun. This was in San Antonio, Texas, and we're working on a better block project actually over here in the corner. And this park is over here. I'm looking at this park, and I notice nobody's using it. And I asked the people involved, the community over here with this project, why isn't anybody using this park? And they said, well, A, there's no kids here, and there's anywhere around, and B, there's nothing for them to do. There's no playground, no nothing, right? Just a field with trees. And so I looked at that and thought, okay, well, as an aside, I'm doing this better block project. I'm going to see if I can do something in the park. I'll take an hour and a half out of my time just to do something rapidly, right? So I drive around looking for things to do, and I find, of course, what anybody can find when they drive around a neighborhood that's kind of got a lot of blight, a bunch of tires. So I just paint them garish colors, right? And just decide I'm going to hang all these tires in the trees, and I'll just come back to this later. So I hang all the tires in the trees, go back, and we're working on this better block, trying to fix these buildings. Turn back around, maybe 20 minutes later, right? And there's kids coming from everywhere. And we're like, where are all these kids? I thought there were no kids here. It's like we created these little kid magnets, and then what was so frustrating was, the city hired us and brought us out to help do this better block project, and the newspapers all came and took pictures of these tire swings, and we're like, I spent maybe $50 in rope, and there was free tires, maybe some spray paint cans, but this was the story. This is what people loved. So anyways, just kind of simple ideas. And we, again, fear of liability, things like that. These were actually probably maybe that far off the ground. So I thought, and then beyond that, so this Better Block project, again, I was an IT consultant literally 3 years ago. I fixed computers and played in rock bands. And this Better Block thing I did just as a community project to try to fix my buildings went viral and went all over the country, right? So in fact, I left my job. I do this full time. I speak and we help direct some of these projects, or we work with cities just to identify what are your zoning ordinances and your rules that are really prohibiting great places. And we open sourced it so anybody can do this, because I really love the idea of the Creative Commons licensing, which is kind of like, we could have trademarked and patented this and require all this licensing fees, and that would have been great. But I love Benjamin Franklin's idea of with the Franklin stove, where he was just like, look, this is beneficial to humanity. If everybody can take this and make it better, actually build upon this is going to be a better tool for us, right? So that's what we did. We said anybody can do this that wants to. We have created a how-to document, take the name, whatever and just build your own Better Block projects. So yeah, within a year, it's going all over the country. And then within 2 years, it's going to Tehran, Iran. It's going to Melbourne, Australia. I just got back from Melbourne and Sydney. It was pretty incredible. But beyond this, the process. This is in Norfolk, Virginia. We just did a project, and where we identified restrictive zoning rules. We identified the rules that we identified that the area should be an arts district. That we're doing this Better Block. That they'd been talking about doing an arts district for 10 years. And all of these ideas, we had these empty buildings and what have you. And this process that typically takes to change zoning and ordinances and all, it usually takes about 2 years minimum. We got it all changed in 2 months based on the Better Block project, because it rallied the community around rapid change. We did these maps to kind of show how you could start connecting them to the neighborhoods, and this is the block, kind of how we're fixing things. It's the community building things together. Again, this is part of the block. We added bike infrastructure. We try to make the environment. We're not trying to be anti-car. We're trying to figure out how do we get as many get many modes of transit into this mix as possible. And then we also how do we capitalize? Because these parking spaces, why don't we take away one parking space, for instance? This, in fact, there's a better picture of it. This one here, we did crosswalks. We turned them into like what do you call it? Hopscotch, thank you. Hopscotch. Because again, we're just trying to have fun too. You're trying to elevate the happiness in the community. But you look at the parking space that had a meter, and maybe it would generate $5-6 a day. But you realize when you could get 3 to 4 tables out there with 4 people each at that table that could flip 4 or 5 times a day. Like, what is the tax revenue based on that? That's actually much more beneficial to us, right? And that creates more eyes on the streets, which actually makes the area feel safer. So we don't have to have so many police kind of sitting around as well. This is an area that's more blighted and closed down. We want people and traffic in the area to make it feel safer. And people want to be around people. So it actually kind of becomes this thing that builds upon itself and makes more success, breeds more success. I'm going to tell the story. I've already shared that picture. And then again, this is an example. This is the Norfolk project in April. One of the buildings. This happens all the time on Better Blocks. It's been vacant for 10 years. Sold that during the project for $1.1 million. And the artists that got involved with our project all collaborated and got together and bought this. So again, just by us showing what it could be temporarily, it made things change rapidly. They didn't actually have zoning for what we put in there. We had like a flea market mixed with like a beer garden mixed with like a skate park thing inside. And they're like, there's no zoning for that. You can't do that. So we said, well, let's pretend there's no zoning and let's just create, because this isn't working as it is. This is an old place. This building used to sell cars out of. And so anyways, now it's thriving. It's doing really well. And again, the building sold. Okay, so I'm going to go back to that streetcar project real fast. So again, it was just me and some friends working on the streetcar. And we told the city of Dallas, I built the website and said, I want to bring the streetcar back, right? The Oak Cliff Transit Authority. And they said, good luck, patting us on the head, Oak Cliff, whatever, bad part of town. And this is my buddy Louis Salcedo in the back there, just an amazing human being. But this guy here, Scott Griggs, he's the guy that identified all the ordinances that we were breaking. He was a lawyer. He's now the city council member. Yeah. So, anyways, so we decided to start filling some grants out, and let's see if we can get the streetcar back here. It's long, it's been gone for half a century. Filled out some Tiger stimulus grant, and what happened was we had a 0.3% chance of winning it, and we did. So we brought the streetcar back, and all I did was build a website. So, example of, thank you. And what that's done, even just with the construction phase alone, has changed the land use. It's actually we've got apartments being built all along the streetcar line, new restaurants. Investors are coming to the area because they see now that we see that there's a permanent infrastructure improvement being put here in place. We see this as being valuable for us, so we're seeing all this business occur. People are moving to our homes in our area that weren't moving there because it was the bad part of town for years. It's becoming safer. The tax revenue is increasing. The health is going up in the community because people have destinations to walk and bike to now. So it's done this dramatic things. And if you ask anybody in Dallas about Oak Cliff, they say 5 years ago, it was a no man's land. And something happened. And that something was just, I swear, 4 or 5 of us getting together and doing these things. In fact, so beyond that, another crazy thing was, so I learned all these tricks, right? It's because I'm doing all this stuff, like those buildings and streetcars. I'm like, wow, you can do anything. Like, why don't I try to start a restaurant with the same idea? I'll get my community together. So I've got a restaurant. It was based on the same idea. It does really well. It's in our neighborhood. So I can start restaurants too, right? And again, I'm an artist, a musician, and computer guy. I should not be starting restaurants, but I figured this stuff out, right? And then I get awards from the president. I get to have dinner with Michelle Obama because the kid stuff. And so I'm like, I'm going to run for U.S. Congress, right? And then I'm in the Venice Biennale. I'm like, what's going on with my life? This has only been 3 years. Like, what can stop me? Really, I can do anything, right? And the one thing that could stop me was I was diagnosed with cancer last year, and it completely stopped everything, right? Stage 3, so it was tough, This is me carting around chemotherapy, and anybody who's had cancer, you know what this is like. Not a fun time. So, anyways, fortunately, in February, I was pronounced as being cancer-free, so we're good. So, thank you. Thank you. But I was spending all that time doing this Build a Better Block project. I was just trying to create this better place that would kind of a better sense of community in more neighborhoods, right? And so the interesting thing was by me doing those things, by trying to build better blocks, right? My community, when I was down, completely, on the ground in my apartment, they start rallying around me and they said, why don't we build a better Jason, right? And they start doing these big events for me and helping me raise money for my bills. They're filling my refrigerator with groceries. They're coming by and checking on me. And that would have never happened had I not worked actively to try to create a neighborhood that I wanted. And that neighborhood was very much based on these ideas of loving the place and creating and doing things together with the community to move the ball forward. This is a picture of the project, and I love, and it was in Australia, right? I just got back from there in June. But the interesting thing from afterwards, they said, what was the most powerful thing of the project? They said, it wasn't the trees, it wasn't the pop-up shops or anything. It was the sense of community we got back. We're all talking now. We're all drinking wine on the front porches. The older people that lived on the block came out and they said, we used to throw block parties all the time. What happened? Just like with me looking at the kids, like we used to ride bikes all the time. What happened? It was 10 years. That's dramatic, right? So again, we got fearful for some reason. So it takes you guys, it takes one person or just a group to start letting people know that it's okay. You don't have to be afraid, and don't worry about failure, right? Honestly, if you fail, I'll fail with you at the very least, but we won't as a community let you fail. Okay, so how do you get things done? So this is kind of my trick. So this is the recipe, because people were like, so restaurants and buildings and streetcars, and again, you did this in 3 years. Like, how did you do all this stuff? First of all, I found you have to show up. If you don't show up, she will, and she's opposed to everything, right? And so that's what. So that was my idea. And the thing is, I know that this is based on a woman in my neighborhood that fought everything, and she's actually a dear friend of mine. I love her to death. But a lot of my ideas were based on conversations with her about her fear of worst-case scenarios, and saying, and I kept showing up at these meetings too, because I think they kept thinking like, well, the young guy's not going to show up. I'll keep staying here. But eventually, she stopped. She would go, she had missed a meeting or two. Then I got the microphone, like, streetcars, bicycles, and things started to change, right? And then I also found it was important to give these ideas names, right? So Bike-Friendly Oak Cliff and the Oak Cliff Transit Authority. This Art Conspiracy was that theater project I did. Somebody bought a cluster of old buildings in our neighborhood and decided to just call them the Bishop Arts District. So just giving things a name gives somebody something for somebody to kind of latch onto and create, personify and promote, right? And then the last and the most important piece is set a date and publish it. And I call it blackmail yourself. I do this for every single project. This is really the biggest key of everything. First of all, I set short deadlines. Never make it out too long, because if you set long deadlines for things, you will talk yourself out of it every time. You will come up with the worst case scenarios. So when I found out, if I just painted the poster, put a lot of energy in the poster and just talking to a few people maybe, and then I put it out on Facebook and told the press, and they published it, then I was like, oh no, I got to commit. I said I was going to do this in 60 days. But all these great things start to happen. These resources start materializing that you didn't realize were there once you put it out there into the public. And the example I give on why it's important to create these short deadlines to get things done is if you look at, like, if my house is extremely messy and I think, oh, this is going to take me a week to clean. How am I going to do this? And like, I don't even want to do this, and this is so frustrating. It's total chaos. I found that if I just call some friends and say I'm having a dinner party in 4 hours, it's amazing how fast I clean the house. And you just, all distractions go away, and you get very efficient. And that's really it for me, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you.